Hello, I'm Sarah. I am a body image and self-esteem health and wellness coach for women. And today I'm going to be going through a session called a Power Hour with my client, Jaiden. We're going to talk about all of the things that have been holding her back, both in her life and her career, and an actual action plan that she can implement today, tomorrow, next week, and for the next 3 months to get her from exactly where she's feeling stuck right now to where she wants to be with her career. Jaiden is an engineer. She's in her 20s. She's struggled in her workplace because of some uncomfortable and unfair workplace experiences. And through our coaching together, I've actually been able to see Jaiden through changing jobs, finding a workplace that benefits her a lot more. But as she's transitioning and she's in these first weeks of her new job, there's a lot of foundations that we want to lay so that she has a good experience, she's able to continue to move forward in this job, and she doesn't fall into any unhealthy patterns or habits or relationship dynamics that she experienced in her last job. So we're going to talk about how she speaks up for herself, how she handles perfectionism and people pleasing in the workplace, and how that flows into the rest of her life. Okay, let's dive in. Thanks for letting me record this. You and I talk once a week already, so this is very normal for us. But we were having a conversation last week about your new job, about you getting settled, about everything you've learned from your last experience, which we don't have to dive into, but it was a challenging one. And we were talking a lot about laying a foundation for this new job that you want to be really strong, both in your career and then also just in your own personal growth and your mindset. And as we were talking last week, I just kept thinking about this power hour structure that I do with usually a lot of new clients, like people that haven't worked with me before, maybe haven't done any sort of like coaching and mentorship. So it's a new experience. And so I give them this power hour experience to kind of give them, like, dip their toes in the water. But I thought it would be really helpful for you because it is a deep dive, usually into a couple core struggles. And you and I talk a lot about work. So that's definitely one that stands out. So I'm going to share my screen just to show what we got going on here. Where's the button? There we go. All right, so I'm going to share my screen for most of the time and just have you be able to see this. It'll just take a moment to load. I'll put it in the little middle of my screen. But first things first, I had you fill out this form. So this is obviously a blank version of it, but I have everyone fill out this form. There's about 10 questions. And basically what this does, you can see in the beginning, is it figures out your baseline, so where you're at, and tells me a lot of basic information on, who you are, how you are, and what you care about. And then we go through exactly what you're struggling with. So I told you last week, like, the more the better. Give me as much information as possible, and you were able to give a lot in that form. And the more that you give me, the better I can analyze all of this stuff. So you filled this out for me. You sent me a text and you were like, it's done. And then I did it on my computer and I did all of my analyzing. So thank you for doing that. What we're going to do today is go through the little PDF ebook that I make for everyone who does this with me. You know that I love to give resources. I love to give everything from the little tips and tricks to tangible things like this. But the reason I'm excited for this for you is because it's an actual, like, step-by-step 3-month visualization of what we want this process of getting comfortable in your job and making it a place that you can hopefully be happy and comfortable and growing at for a long time in the future, because you've spent enough time in job situations that don't feel good, and you've done the job search stress, which has been not enjoyable as well. But before I dive in, just because I know your situation, but not other people that will watch this do, at whatever level you're comfortable with, can you just share a little bit about your recent experiences with being a woman in STEM, being an engineer, and changing jobs as well?
Yeah, definitely. I'm like, it's kind of hard to decide where to begin because there's so much. Um, I guess I'll start. So, a little over 2 years ago, I graduated with my master's in mechanical engineering, um, with and a concentration in something that is crazy and I don't want to talk about, but microsystems, basically. But that led me to working at Intel Corporation, and I worked there about a year and a half. And even though it kind of was like in my dream field, it was what I was really interested in, the job did not turn out to be what I was told it would be. I was working 50, 60 hour weeks, being called throughout the night, just very overworked, very underappreciated, knew way more than people like way senior than me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was hard. I made some really good friendships, but through, I'm like, I think met you right after I left that. But like working with like my friends, my grandma, and just like getting support, I was able to get out of that situation and kind of took the first job that I could find. And unfortunately, that situation was even worse. Where I kind of like traded all the things that were good, like kind of being interested in the job and having like decent coworkers, just being overworked, to having a decent work schedule, but having people like constantly like down my throat. Um, Being the only female mechanical engineer at the company, being discriminated against, being told that my appearance was distracting and made to put on a shirt. I remember I talked to you that very day.
Yeah,
Yeah, crazy. Um, like told not to talk about my salary, had
which
like,
is
which is,
legal.
yeah, it's unlawful for them to tell me that. Um, Having like the HR woman come after me, having one of the only other women come after me, uh, which is like really sad to see and like kind of like open my eyes to that reality that like in STEM, like especially I think women can be competitive in a lot of areas, but especially in
Mm-hmm.
STEM, I think it comes out, which is really sad because I'm like, I really want to uplift everybody. Um, yeah. And so that situation went a lot longer than we wanted, but since I had a great support system, I had you, I had my therapist, my psychiatrist, my lovely partner, Jared, friends. I was able to put in a claim against the company. And I'm about to see how that
Mm-hmm.
resolves, hopefully, um, which is like amazing. Like, I'm actually inspiring a girl that I just started working with at my new job to maybe do the same thing about like against the school that we went to because she had
Mm-hmm.
a similar situation happen. So I'm like, that's really cool. Because I know that if I didn't have support, I definitely wouldn't have went through that whole process. And I'm very thankful I did. Um, so that kind of brings us to today. I'm almost a month into my new job, and so far things are going very well, which is
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable because I'm used to all of the red flags everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so like disorienting because it's like, oh my God, like where is this toxic work environment that I'm used to? Why aren't you getting mad at me? Why aren't you
Mm-hmm.
expecting me to be a certain way? Um, yeah. So I'm like, that's a very like high level overview of the last 2.5 years of my life. Um,
Yeah, that was perfect. And obviously, I know so many of the details.
yeah,
There's so many details. When I say that this is something that has been weighing on you for months, like we talk about it pretty much
yeah,
every week. And maybe there's not a huge event, but there's always something to talk about because everything that you had to experience that last job and the job before that as well, but especially the last one that I've been working with you every week through, that has been really emotional, has been really confusing, I think, because when these things happen, the questions you brought to me were like, am I overreacting? Like, is it my fault? Am I the one that's in the wrong? And there's a lot of confusion, a lot of gaslighting, honestly, a lot of just flat out inappropriate behavior. And even though we know that it's those things, it really makes us question our role in it and question who we are and question our self-worth. And it's one of the reasons that it's been so important for you to find a better job, is because it was impacting your mental health a lot, but it was also making you question who you are and how good you are at your job, which you said, like, there were people in senior roles that you knew more than. Like, you are a good employee, a good engineer, and a really intelligent, compassionate person from what I know of you as well, which I know you pretty well at this point. And so, yeah, we had to get you out of there, and it took a while. Job searching is not fun, but I think through having our conversations, at least from what you've told me, it's a good support to have someone to check in with, to make sure that you are seeing your own worth through a process like that. And last week, what we talked about was negotiating that claim that you're putting in against them, essentially a settlement that you're going through. And we don't have to go into the details of it, especially because it's not settled yet. But we were literally talking numbers last week and adding it up and figuring out exactly what price you can put on all of the shit that you've had to deal with. And it's pretty impossible to put a financial amount on something like that, on everything that you've had to go through. But the question we kept coming back to is, like, what do you need from this in order to feel like you spoke up for yourself, like you held your own, and then so that you can move on. And so that's really what resulted in the conversation we'll have today, because you have that coming up soon. You're about a month into your new job. You're in a period of transition, and the period of transition that we go through, whether it's changing jobs, ending or starting relationships, big life changes, like when people have children or they get married or they move. Moving is a huge one as well. Going on vacation, even, because we're out of our usual element. Those are the most important times to have that support. They feel the most hectic, so they can feel like the times when we have the least time and energy to spare, but they're the times where it's the most important for us to be able to show up for ourselves and to have other people who can help us do that. So without further ado, I'll share my screen again. I've showed that little survey that I had you fill out, and then basically I took all of that information and I put it through all of my little systems. And what I walked away with was something that looks like this. When this loads for you, you'll be able to see it. But this is your roadmap to freedom, whatever freedom means to us. For you in this case, it is more or less, I would say, having a lifestyle that fills you up inside, like fulfills you and makes you feel good. And lifestyle includes career, but it's also life outside of work. And you and I were saying before we started recording this that a lot of the themes that you've experienced in your career are also themes that show up a lot in work. And so we've talked a lot about friendships and relationship to self, because we're talking about work. So I'm going to go through this with you. I'm going to break this down for you. I'm not going to read every detail, because it's something that's designed for you to carry with you and refer back to in the future. So I'm going to glaze over the major sections, but basically what I've done is I've broken this up into understanding who you are as a person, because that's very important to know, understanding what's holding you back and where you're wasting some energy, and where you can redirect that energy instead, because being stressed or overthinking or being anxious or being perfectionist or people pleasers, those are exhausting roles to play. We want to redirect some of that energy. And then we have a couple just small but impactful steps that we're going to think about taking, about implementing. We're going to talk about that action plan collaboratively. You and I kind of set mini goals every week, so that'll be easy for us. But yeah, sound good? Any thoughts or questions so far?
No, it sounds great to me. I'm really excited. Oh,
I did
I love
too.
seeing these things
I
that
was
you
in
make.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love when I make a little thing. Okay, so let's dive into this. Again, I'm going to glaze over some of the basics because you'll be able to look at it later. Like, I don't need to read you this table of contents, but isn't it pretty? You know who I am. We don't need to read this page either. Core things that this is going to do for you, though, is I want you to visualize this again as a roadmap. So we're going to see the challenges. We're going to visualize the solution, the dream life where they are solved. We're going to get clear on your core values because those really influence how you show up in the world, and they'll influence what strategies work for you and also how you make decisions and what makes you feel good. We're going to have that action plan, and then we're going to track our progress. So we are taking every step. Confidence, we're lessening our self-doubt, we're finding balance, we're feeling strong, we're finding fulfillment. Those are customized to you specifically based on what you've shared. So that's essentially what our goals are here. First things first, I want to talk about what your core values and qualities are. So these are things that I already knew about you, but it's nice to have them listed out. And the reason that we do this is because, again, I want you to be able to do things and make decisions from a place of knowing who you are. Self-love is not just accepting ourselves, it is getting to know ourselves. And you've done so much of that in this process. Before we started recording this, we were talking about how you're essentially feeling a lot of discomfort in your new situation right now, both with relationships and with workplace, because you're being treated better and you're treating yourself better. And that is something that shows that you're making a lot of progress, but it also can feel a little bit uncomfy. But the reason you've been able to do that is because you've gotten a lot more aware of and familiar with who you are. So your core values that I saw based on this form that I had you fill out, this deep dive: authenticity, empathy, resilience, patience, confidence is one that very much already exists, and resource. So we really have a lot of tools that we're going to put in there, like your core values being one of them, but all of the other resources I'll share because you are a resourceful person. And I've noticed that you take a lot of initiative and you like to make a lot of changes. But for example, the reason that's important to know this, and we've talked about this with you and I specifically, we both have experienced this. Like, it's really valuable to know that empathy is one of your core values because you should take pride in that, but also because empathy often connects to people pleasing. It often can connect to struggling to set boundaries. And I say that because you and I have both talked about our own struggles with that privately, and we'll talk about it more today. So having some clarity on exactly what your core values are allows you to both see how valuable and amazing you are as a person, but also to maybe see some sensitive points. I don't want to call them like weak spots. It doesn't feel right to call them that because it's not weak to be empathetic. It's not weak to have a heart. But you and I both know that it can be hard for you to set boundaries sometimes. Do we agree?
Definitely.
Yeah. How do you feel like that showed up in your life so far, especially with I guess the experience of having the good parts of you feeling like they're not appreciated or they're taken for granted?
Mm. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many things coming to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm like more recently, definitely like, well, even like in my last work experience, like my boss just handing everything off, all of his work off onto me because that's just, I don't want to say that's who I am, but just like I'm very empathetic. Like I'm like, okay, like he probably has something on his plate, even though now I know he didn't. Um, and, and like just like knowing that like if I do this, maybe and it's the people pleasing, like I'll get like they'll like me more, whatever it is. And I feel like that's very reflected in some of my friendships over the past few years. Thankfully, I feel like a lot of my friendships like that are no longer in my life, but I
Mm-hmm.
definitely see that looking back. And then even with my parents too, like just constantly like wanting that validation and just like trying to outperform myself and make them happy, but
Mm-hmm.
not like worrying as much about my own happiness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is exhausting over time. I'm going to jump down to our concise list of our current challenges because that's why these are on the same page. I mean, we have your core values with the things that challenge us the most, and there are a lot of parallels there. So you're a very empathetic person, but then that comes across in, like you mentioned, the people pleasing, also the perfectionism, and then the energy drains. Like you have these extremely high standards for yourself, and it's not a bad thing to have high standards, but when the high standards that can help make us successful, they start negatively impacting other areas of our life, or they make us burn out, they make us exhausted, they give us those energy drains. It makes it really hard for us to sustain that over time, and also to feel good enough as we are. We also have on here seeking external validation. And I hope this section doesn't feel like a direct call out in a bad way, but it is a very honest analysis that a lot of us need. External validation is not necessarily a bad thing. You and I have talked about this. Validation is not a dirty word, but when the majority of our validation comes from the outside, that puts our self-worth in what other people think, and what other people think is always changing. And then we also need some constant check-ins from other people in our lives, like our workplace or our partners, in order to just continue to feel good. Versus internal validation is knowing who we are. So again, knowing your core values, knowing who you are as a person, knowing what you're good at, knowing your inherent worth, knowing what you like about yourself. That's really important. But yeah, so the perfectionism and the people pleasing, I think, really manifest in a lot of like imposter syndrome. Like you've talked about how you feel like you always need to be doing more at work, but there's no amount that feels good enough. I noticed that a lot of us do this where we think that what we should be able to achieve in a day is up here. And no matter how much we're capable of, maybe what we're capable of is like right here, we'll always keep the standard like one notch ahead. Even if we raise or lower our capacity of what we're able to achieve, the standard that we hold ourselves to doesn't stay up here. It always just stays one notch ahead of what's realistic for us. And I find that that comes up a lot, and that feeds into the imposter syndrome and the external validation as well. And then, of course, you and I have talked about body image and how that plays in as well. Your workplace experiences have challenged your body image in a lot of ways because they have directly objectified and disrespected your body. And then there's just the body image experience of being a regular human in the world and being a woman. Being a woman in a male-dominated industry, you are inherently around people all the time who don't understand what it's like to be you, and we live in a patriarchy, so they just have it very differently. They haven't had the same experiences, and that plays into a lot of the body image stuff as well, because you're surrounded by people who just don't understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. In this list of challenges, what do you feel is the most unexpected to see on this list?
I'm like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of them are expected. I think one that I think the seeking external validation, like I know 100% that's how it is, but I feel like it even almost, because it's like kind of hidden behind a lot of the other challenges. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely partnered. So it's like, that's like kind of distance from me. And like actually like realizing that one is harder, like acknowledging that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, for example, like telling myself like I need to do this perfectly, like I need to do better, or like being overly competitive and like being
Mm-hmm.
like better than this person. It's
Mm-hmm.
because I want validation from my supervisor or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. Um, but I don't think I see it, especially in the moment when I'm having those thoughts. I'm just thinking, I need to do this. I need to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it's something that has been a pattern for you for a very long time. And patterns are tricky to break because they try their absolute hardest to stay sneaky, like to stay hidden, to stay almost subconscious. And so, yeah, I totally agree. I think the perfectionism or the people pleasing can almost be like a more surface level
Yeah.
symptom of maybe the deeper struggle that we're digging into now at this level of your experience is that external validation. I think about this when I think about you leaving your last job and making a well thought out decision of when to leave because you thought for a long time, like, should I stay until I get a new job or should I just put my mental health first and leave without having something else lined up? And that was really hard for you to decide. That was a big decision.
Mhm.
And I remember when you finally resigned and you sent your letter and they reacted very immaturely in my opinion, and that was frustrating for you because they didn't validate you at all. They were very invalidating from what you told me. And so I could see in that moment how much internal validation was incredibly important for you in order to have peace with that
Yeah.
experience, because they're not going to give it to you. They're not going to say, we treated you poorly. We didn't pay you enough. We didn't take good care of you as an employee. We sold you a dream, and that's not what this job actually looks like. We're
Yeah.
sorry. You weren't going to get any of that from them. You might get it from this settlement that you're going through, but even that is just putting a financial price on that emotional strife. And so the internal validation that now has to come is you validating your own experience through examples, through feeling your emotions, which is just literally sitting in the feelings, through talking about your experience with confidence, and also through raising your standards going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I'm like, I remember just thinking back, like, it's crazy. Like over like months and months, I like planned out my exit interview, like what I was going to say and all these things, and just like planning and really wanting that validation.
Yeah.
And not getting that was just like, it was strange because everybody was like, oh my God, like you must be so happy you're out of there. You don't have to work the next 2 weeks. You can just like
Yeah.
be gone. And it was just like a very, very bittersweet moment because I was just like, wow, like I just felt like something they could throw away.
Yeah.
Um, and but like the obviously like the self-validation, like reminding myself like that, I mean, just because I showed them respect and gave them a 2 week notice with an
Mm-hmm.
honest but respectful letter of resignation doesn't mean that they're going to give that back to me. And like, and
Yeah.
obviously they didn't do that the entire time. So like, I think something that you and I talk about is like knowing who I am. Like, this is like what this is about a bit. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I showed up how I wanted to. And like,
Yeah.
I didn't stoop down to their level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm really proud of how, looking back, I know like at the moment it was super stressful, but looking back, I'm really proud of myself.
Yeah. Exactly. I always like to say in situations where me and someone or something else are disagreeing is that I always want to look back and be proud of how I showed up. And I've said that to you many times. And I will stay, and this might be a little controversial, but I will stay the better person, the bigger person in a situation so that I can have the satisfaction of looking back and feeling proud and being able to say, like, I didn't do anything that I'm not proud of. I
Yeah.
didn't like that situation and I've maybe had a lot of thoughts that didn't feel good. My feelings are completely valid. Your feelings are completely valid, but our actions are ours to control. And we do have to live with them. So it's not that you were going to do anything crazy, but you could have, responded in emotional ways that would have made your life harder. And that's what we didn't want to do, was make your life harder through that situation. So for your own sake, self-validating in that moment, pretty much because it was the only choice you had. But
Yeah. that's
that's how we learn these things a lot of times, is it is literally having to. So I'm really proud of you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's continue on. So we know a lot of the answers to this, why we're facing these challenges, but I do think that having it written out, again, can be really helpful. I'll just go through these quick. Past job trauma, if anybody hasn't gotten the vibe, there's a lot of that in this room. We understand that. We talk about it a lot. And then what you mentioned before, so this conditioning that you have from when you're younger to always feeling like you need to be doing the most, impressing people. You and I have talked about this with like being high achieving kids and getting a lot of external validation from achieving, whether it's like getting good grades or playing all the sports, or in college it was like, for me, oh my God, I don't know how you balance doing so much every day, because I was academic, I was involved in my community, I was in Greek life, I was doing so many, and I had a job, I had 2 jobs actually, doing so many things. And I got a lot of external validation for that. And I was basically conditioned through childhood, high school, middle school, high school, college to associate overworking myself with getting validation and being seen as someone who works hard enough. And so I see this in you as the same way I see it in myself. And this is the diet culture influence as well. The tendency we have to feel like we're not doing enough if we're not suffering. Like if we're like, oh my God, I'm going through hell, it's a lot easier for us to be like, oh, I must be doing enough because I'm putting myself through to pushing myself to my absolute maximum. It's very uncomfortable for us to achieve a lot and do the things that are, the most fulfilling for us. But if it's not stressful or exhausting, it's hard for us to feel like we're doing enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Resonates. Yeah.
And so the kind of resource or the focus point that we have here is just really healing from a lot of that past trauma. That's pretty much the purpose of this call. This conversation specifically was for you and I to lay a foundation for this new job, to not have the past job trauma show up there. And then you and I also have consistent conversations about just past experiences in general that have shaped how you see yourself and how you show up in the world. And that really is, all we can do is heal from that. And you've done a beautiful job at it. Really quickly, just to call you out on one more level, I want you to know these things that these are basically your biggest stories as far as your negative self-talk. And I want you to know them so that when these stories repeat in your head, you can call it what it is, which is, oh, that's that story of me saying that I'm not enough. That's the perfectionism. That's the external validation. That's the I'm being overly self-critical. That's all that this list exists for. I don't think that any of this is groundbreaking for us to read and see. Maybe the external validation will be a story that we start to just notice a little bit more clearly. But again, I think that that's you seeing this on a deeper level than you have been able to before because of all of the work that you've been doing. So now that we've gone through all of what is holding us back, let's talk about where we're wasting our energy really quickly and then some steps we're going to take. So we know deep down where we're wasting our energy. We often know this consciously as well. Knowing it and being aware of it is not the same as changing it, but we do have to be aware of it first. So you are aware of a lot of these things. We've talked about them a lot. We have self-doubt, we have the perfectionism, we have basically caring what other people think. Like that's a huge theme here. And that's something that I struggled with for a long time, still comes up sometimes. But those things take our energy in a way that it basically depletes energy that is not renewable, versus we can spend our energy on other things, because most things we do, most things we think and feel take energy. But there are certain things we can invest our energy in that basically brings that energy back to us. It is a renewable resource in that way. So something like that is self-compassion, self-trust, and then focusing on the progress you're making and essentially enjoying the process instead of focusing on like an end point of our life or perfection. So I don't know how this shows up in your life right now, but if you're anything like me, I often have this vision in my mind that's, again, like a couple steps ahead of where I actually am. And I never quite reach that finish line or point where I think that I'll feel successful or happy or whatever it is I tell myself I'm going to feel at that moment, because I'm always pushing the finish line a little bit farther ahead as I move farther ahead. So, for example, I used to do this with when I was obsessively dieting, and I was convinced that losing weight, that getting back to a much smaller weight was going to be the thing that finally made me feel confident. So I was always pushing that number like lower and lower. And then even when I hit those numbers, I never felt confident. I did this in my work life for a long time where I was like, I've run my own business for almost 4 years and it's a badass thing to do and I love it. But in the beginning, I was a workaholic because I was like, oh, just one more client, like one more benchmark, one more financial goal, whatever. And I looked back on maybe my first year and a half in business and was like, I've done really well for myself and I don't feel great about it because I just keep pushing that benchmark back. Looking at your life now, especially entering a new job, so probably thinking about career a lot and just your path, your trajectory, but then also life outside of work. Where do you feel like your next benchmark is, or this, I guess, visualization of what you want this life to look like as well? What do you feel like is the vision for you right now? What you feel like you're working towards or you want?
I think definitely with work and we like because I'm always holding myself to this like super high standard, like getting very well integrated
Mm-hmm.
into the team, um and just like starting my work and I know I have this pressure on myself to be like, oh well, I'm like a super fast learner. I'm a very hard worker. There
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna just like hit it and just like start like hit the ground running, right? I think that's like the benchmark. And like I know I like hear it and I'm like, I know that's not reasonable. Um
Mm-hmm.
Actually like within like I know like within my head, like I and saying it out loud, it sounds ridiculous to me. But I'm like, oh, like I'm probably gonna be moving. I'll have like my permanent desk with my group probably next week. I
Yeah.
very excited. I had my final end brief today. So I'll get to move in there. And like that was kind of my like first thing. I was like, okay, I just need to get in there. And I think that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
I worked very hard because other people were like, oh, hopefully you'll move in this time, this time, this time. And I was just like, when it happens, it happens. It's not on
Mm-hmm.
me. I can't
Mm-hmm.
hold anything against myself because it's not on me. It's dependent on everybody else doing their job.
Yeah.
But now that that like is creeping up, now I'm like feeling like, oh, I'm actually gonna have to like start like working, not like only
Yeah.
doing. So yeah, definitely. I don't want to expect too much of myself right away, even though that's a
Yeah.
pattern for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I totally understand and can totally relate. And it is really important to be able to recognize that pattern in you as well. One of the first things that came to mind when you said like I'm a fast learner, work really hard, all of that stuff. I know that
Mhm.
about you. Like you are a fast learner, you are very intelligent, you work very hard, you think about how other people think and feel, you're considerate and compassionate, and all of those things make you an amazing person and also employees. They're very lucky to have you. But the first thought that came to mind was, regardless of if you are a fast learner and a hard worker, where does the need to be that and show that to someone else in this new role, where does that come from? Are you working so hard because you're just love work so much or you're so excited, or because we have this discomfort with being new at something, with like, for me at least, like learning a new skill as fast as possible is something that I almost treat like a game in my head. And yes,
Mhm.
I can learn fast and I can impress myself with how fast I can learn. But the core drive for me a lot of times is that I feel really uncomfortable not being good at something or not knowing everything or not essentially being perfect. And I realize that it's the perfectionism. Does that resonate?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also because like in my first job out of college, put it really simply, like we were basically not graded, but like our mentor, there were a few of us that started all at the same time. And he kind of like mentally graded us. And he was like, oh, Jaiden's doing the best. She gets to do all of these things first. And it was like
Mm,
this immediate validation. And I was like, oh,
mm-hmm,
I'm the best. Like, oh,
mm-hmm.
like that little high. Like I'm getting it right now just thinking about myself like back then. But it's like looking back, it's just like it's so silly. And I'm like, how did that make the other people feel also? Like they were
Yeah,
trying really hard. Um,
yeah,
but like you said, like it's almost like I like gamified it. Like it was just like, okay, like I know he's basically it's like a game to him, so I'm just gonna win.
yeah,
Yeah. I know that that's
absolutely.
and also like the perfectionism too, for sure. Um, because I really don't think I think something that I'm realizing now, especially like I'm very, very like from the beginning, I'm like, I want work-life balance. I am not going to be one of those people that wants to be working 50, 60 hours a week because I just love my job. Do I want to
Mm-hmm,
love my job? Yes. But I also want to have a life.
mm-hmm.
And so it's not like I know that my motivation isn't to go into this job and be like, oh my God, I love it so much. I'm just going to go, 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 go.
Yeah,
It's not perfection, just like being uncomfortable with not being good at something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's that classic battle of like logical versus emotional, because logically, of course, you need time to learn a new job. Like, duh, right? Like you're new at it and they're training you for a reason. But then that emotional side of us comes in that is from that younger conditioning, from past experiences that you've had that makes you feel for some reason. And you and I talk about this in depth, but it's different for everyone. Why not being perfect feels unsafe, why being new at something or having needs, like needing to ask for help, for example. I work with a lot of people who are really struggling to ask for help, even on small things. It's been something I've had to consciously practice in my own life, is just like, why am I so uncomfortable taking up space? Why am I so uncomfortable needing help or not knowing something? And the answer is different for everyone, but digging into that is really going to allow you to show up in this workplace in a way that feels a lot more fulfilling and a lot more safe for you as well, because you don't want to end up in a situation like your last jobs where they mistreated you and some part of you essentially allowed them. And I'm not saying that it happened because of how you let them treat you, but I'm saying that you recognize in yourself that there were moments where you wish you had stood up for yourself more. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I see for you as far as a vision is realistically having to walk the line of being a woman in your field, which is um, difficult to say the least. But within that, being able to just give off an energy that's like, I respect her. I'm not going to fuck with her, honestly. And you won't get that from everybody in your field. Let's be realistic. Like, some people in your field just will not respect you. And that is something that we have to deal with as women. Not something that's okay, but it is something that we have to experience in a lot of situations. But overall, just being able to, even when those things happen, recognize that they're not happening because of who you are. They're happening because of who that person is in the world that we live in, and then not taking it home with you when the
Yeah.
workday ends. Because in your last job, you were super stressed, you were exhausted, and you were constantly thinking about like how this horrible plot was going to develop next. So what I see for you right now in this transition period is essentially a really good opportunity to implement a lot of what you learned in your last experience. Even though it was hard, we learned a lot of lessons. And then also to be able to just move forward in a way that has compassion for yourself as you continue to learn, because it's not about this job being perfect. It's just about making this job something that feels good and safe for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
definitely. I'm
Yeah.
like, I think that's definitely, even if that's not how I put it, like that's what I want.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely a part of me, like also, I think it's coming from the perfectionism, is like putting the pressure on, like, oh my God, I have to love this. Like I
Mhm.
have to. So I'm like, I'm not like I don't want to deal with this a third time. Um, but like putting that pressure of it needing to be perfect, it needing to be like the perfect job and be so
Mhm.
interesting. Like I know that that's not like the right mentality to go into it with.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. And not the right mentality because of what you said, which is that you're putting the pressure on yourself. So
Yes. Yeah.
what we learned from your last job realistically is that they didn't give a shit about you. Like you felt disposable because they treated you like you were disposable. And
Yeah.
that's not appropriate and very hard to experience, but that is the reality of a lot of people in a lot of jobs,
Yeah.
is that at the end of the day, they're going to choose themselves over you. They're going to choose the company over an individual, especially if the individual isn't them. And so, as much as your new workplace is good so
Mhm.
far, and we love that it's good, you also have to keep that in mind that at the end of the day, their top priority is them, and your top priority should be you. And that's not something that's going to make you a bad employee. It's not something that's going to make you a selfish person. It just makes you realistic. And that allows you to look out for yourself as far as the trajectory of your career and also with having that work life balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I like that of like I know their priority I can't talk. Priority is
Yeah.
them. My priority is me. And I think that's like a huge like that resonates with not even just the job thing, but
Yeah.
like everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk quickly about these action steps because I keep them super small because I want them to be super manageable and I just want them to help give us a vision into what the future can look like if we just take some very small steps. So some things that I think would be beneficial are just these small actions that we can take like today, like maybe the next week, is just some small like affirmations or things that you like about yourself. I want you to think about where you want to have more positivity in your life. So in a lot of situations, this is people writing what they like about themselves. That's the recommendation I would give. But you also, in this specific situation, might be writing lists like ways that I'm proud of myself for showing up at work this week, or 3 things that I learned at work, or 3 moments where I allowed myself to be imperfect. You can customize this to your specific needs, which is definitely shifting the validation from external to internal, from lessening that people pleasing, that perfectionism. This ties into the goal or action step for approximately the next week, which is boundary related. So again,
Mhm.
with the people pleasing, you're not just dealing with your relationship with a corporation or a business that you're working for. You're also dealing with interpersonal relationships at work. And we don't have to dive into this in detail, but I know a lot about your experience with coworkers and then just with friendships in general. What does boundary setting in relationships with people at work, what does that mean to you and why is it important?
I think definitely looking back, I'm like there's like select people at both of my last jobs that I think I definitely didn't set boundaries with, and it made the situations I was in much worse. Like I was already dreading coming into work because of how I was being treated, but also because I didn't set a boundary with these specific people, it made it even more like I dreaded it even more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like that's definitely something I don't want to repeat. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we kind of talked about it, you alluded to it earlier, like there's this uncomfortability that now I'm like, oh, I have this value for myself and I know I need to set these boundaries and I'm actually aware of it now. Um, and just kind of like being able to do that. Like I'm already picturing like the person and like kind of like I know what needs to happen, but getting over the hump of actually doing it,
Yeah. Yeah.
wanting. Yeah.
So you were telling me before this call that there's basically a specific conversation that you maybe feel like you need to have, and it's someone that we've talked about who is a perfectly nice person but a newer relationship, and you want to start it off on a good foot because in your past relationships with coworkers, more boundaries would have been beneficial. So we have that clarity, and now we're trying to do the scary thing, which is have conversations with people, because we can have the conversations in a way that they're not conflict, they are conversations. Like, we speak our truth and our feelings in a way that doesn't attack someone else. But the other side of that is, as people pleasers and perfectionists and just people that care what other people think, we hate that we can't control how that other person is going to respond. And I think that that's where most of the anxiety around boundary setting probably sits, because it's like, you know that you're not going to say it in a mean way. You know that what you are feeling is very valid, both based on like employee code of conduct, but also just in your own emotions being valid. But you also don't want that other person to respond negatively. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How will your friendship with this person or relationship with this person be better? And how will your work life be better if you are able to set boundaries?
Like if I like the main situation that like caused me to feel this way happened today, if I were able to kind of avoid that situation, avoid that conversation, I think I would feel a lot more comfortable at work, which obviously is a priority. Like I know how it feels to not be comfortable.
Yeah.
Um, I think it would, not that it's all about productivity, but I'm like, I think it would make it easier. It also would make it easier to work with this person because this is a person that I will need to work with in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just like overall, like I think it would help a lot.
Yeah.
And admitting that like makes me think like I kind of feel it like the description of like how I'm feeling right now is like kind of melting to the idea of doing it. Because like
Yeah.
I am like playing like, oh, like how is this person gonna react? Um, and I don't want to ruin this friendship, relationship, whatever it is,
Yeah.
right off.
Yeah.
Which realistically I know I'm gonna do my best not to do that.
Yeah.
But
And again, without sharing all of the goss on the pod, but from what you've told me, like the conversation you want to have is very realistic.
yeah,
And if this person is unable to hear you and understand you, even if they don't agree, boundaries are not about making someone agree with us or see it our way. It's giving them an invitation to understand how to be a better friend to us, basically. If this person isn't able to or willing to do that with you, then that's also an indication that it wouldn't be a healthy relationship for you. And so we often avoid setting boundaries, and therefore, because we don't want to deal with the conflict, therefore miss out on the opportunity to basically have a red flag waved in our face because we don't want to have to see it. And so if this conversation doesn't go well, like it goes catastrophic, the way that anxiety is probably making it seem, which it won't, then that's also really valuable information. It's uncomfortable, but we will have those uncomfortable conversations in life. There's an affirmation I really enjoy when it comes to worrying about what other people think, whether it's how they'll react or their opinions, or if people will judge us. And it's, the people that care don't matter, and the people that matter don't care. So if this person cares that you have the audacity to set a boundary, then this isn't someone that is maybe healthy for them to matter so much to you, like for you to be close to them. And if they don't care, then it shows that it's someone that can be a healthy part of our life. That makes sense?
definitely. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
like had a
Yeah.
friendship come to mind of somebody who did care, and I'm like, oh, they're not in
Yep.
my life anymore. So
Yep. Yep. And that's why
definitely,
a lot of friendship breakups happen, is because people um, can't, when we do have healthy boundaries and we do set those boundaries, is that, people can't can't follow them. And that they're not rules to be followed, but they're guidelines. And people that love us and want to see us happy, they should want to meet us halfway. And that's okay if, you know, relationships end. We obviously don't want that to happen, but relationships do end because they don't serve us anymore, not because we're horrible people and we don't deserve good friends, all that stuff. But boundary setting is uncomfortable. It is. But you've gotten so much better at it as well. Even in the last month in this new job has been a huge opportunity for you to learn and implement a lot of what you learned in your last experience. My last thought for us here, thinking about the next couple months as far as your kind of transition period that you're in right now, is that I just want you to focus when you can on taking care of yourself. So I put this as like mindful movement and self-care because those are things that you mentioned wanting in that form that you filled out. But overall, it's what we've talked about in our sessions before. So like the intention behind the action. So whether it's movement or self-care or cooking yourself a nice meal or going out for dinner or sleeping in or waking up early, it doesn't matter what the action is so much as the intention behind it. And with our conversation of you having work-life balance and not giving so much of yourself to this new job, when you don't give as much of yourself, you have more left over to give back to yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What do you feel is a realistic relationship with something like movement or self-care for you in the next few months?
Well, in terms of movement, something like I really was enjoying in my time off between jobs. I like was doing these little workout videos that I always talk about. Um, and I was really, really enjoying that. So I think getting back to that, but like maybe making a goal of it like once a week or something like that would be really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Just to like ease myself back into it. Um, self-care. I mean, even just like reading my book before bed. That's been like something that like has made me really happy lately.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two things that came up right away. The other thing would be just like doing like little crafts or art or things like that. I'm like, I
Mm-hmm.
know sometimes you do like girls' craft nights. I'm like, I haven't gotten to go to one. I want to do that. But yes, um, definitely. And I mean, like, obviously meeting with you, like that's super helpful, meeting with my
Mm-hmm.
therapist. Um, Something that I'm like coming to value a lot more is meeting with like my best friend who like I feel like we just like we're able to be around each other and we don't need to be like doing something like crazy
Yeah.
and like we can just like hang out. And if she's in a bad mood, that's okay. If I'm in a bad mood, that's just like
Mm-hmm.
being able to have like I want to say like a body double, but like it's not even that, but like a
Yeah.
little bit more than that. But yeah.
Yeah. Those friendships are super important. And yeah, and that honestly, though, everything you just said sounds perfect because we don't need to overthink it. We don't need to make it complicated. If we do make it complicated, then it is almost
Yeah.
always overwhelming. And then the overwhelm often leads to that like paralysis feeling of like, I can't do anything. So the overwhelm cycle is not for us. Let's keep it simple.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think what will be beneficial for you as well is making any sort of things that you do for yourself, like time with your best friend or a craft or any sort of self-care or those workout videos, make it like give it that energy of like it being a little treat. So like
Yeah.
for example, I had a client who wanted to get back into movement. She was not exercising at all. Like her life was very stagnant. And she just started with, she loved to run, which I know is a controversial opinion. I also love to run. But if you like to run, then this will make sense. And if you don't like to run, make it an activity that you do enjoy. But she loved to run. So she didn't have a lot of time, didn't have a lot of energy. And so she just made it her like Saturday or Sunday thing. So it was the thing that she looked forward to on the weekend. I think that having things to look forward to is extremely important. And it is almost guaranteed to make you so much more likely to actually do the things. And so if you can find an approach to exercise, to self-care, to whatever that you enjoy, it will make you so much more excited to do it and therefore so much more likely. For example, this is why I personally am a matching set girly when I go to the gym. Like if I have a cute little outfit to put on, I will want to put that outfit on. And then once the outfit's on, I might as well just go work out. Like it's gonna get me there. I love to read, but often don't prioritize it because it's a task that doesn't necessarily feel quote unquote productive. But I love reading when I have a nice cup of tea. And so
Mm.
buying a tea or like having my little hot water pot in my room to make my tea, having something like that, a nice mug. We love mugs. I love mugs. Having something like that that I'm excited about gets me to make the tea. And now that I've made the tea, I'm like, I want to read a book. And it's those little incentivizations that we do for ourselves that also feel like self priority and self care in the process. How does that
Mm.
sound?
No, that sounds great. I'm like mm, something that came to mind with my exercise videos. I paired those with I got this cute, like gigantic yoga mat and it's a frog.
Mm,
And it's so
mm,
cute. It's like the cutest thing ever. It like matches the vibe of this room, but it's the
yeah,
cutest. And it's just like taking it out and putting it out and like looking at it just like gives me joy. Um,
yeah, exactly,
once it's out, I'm like, oh well, I might as well do some yoga or whatever it is. Um,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what you need. That's exactly what I mean, and that's perfect. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. I have one more, just quick. I guess I have two questions for you. First things first, as we come to the end of this very important conversation, what was the most, I guess, surprising for you to hear or to realize?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think I think like the external validation is like a very, very big one. Like when I was talking about like the gamified system at my other work and like the feeling that that gave me, like in
Mm-hmm.
that moment, it's just like it was very surreal.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think, like we said, like it's definitely something that I like knew, but it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been something that like I feel like I consciously like worked on. There's definitely I think we've talked about like my work with you has been kind of like an onion. Like we started with the body image stuff, and then like we work like smaller and smaller, like and get deeper and deeper. And I feel like that's kind of peeling back these layers and getting to that point. And so that's like a big realization for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think focusing on that will be like major for me because I'm like, now that I'm thinking more about it, I'm like, I see it like in so much of my daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would get rid of, like, or at least working on it would help ease a lot of my anxiety and like just self doubt, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. So exciting, so helpful to have just another perspective and to be able to get one layer deeper. I completely agree with you. When we started, it was a lot of body image focused stuff, and we are just peeling back layers. That's what my experience has been like too, where body image is still a really big passion for me and something that I work with a lot of people on, but personally is not so big of a part of my journey right now. I'm in my like learning to regulate my nervous system now that I've gone through the body image stuff and the food stuff and then the perfectionism and people pleasing and anxiety stuff. And I just keep kind of going deeper and deeper. And now I'm into nervous system regulation and like optimizing my physical health. That's like the step that I'm in. And it's really interesting to see how your journey has evolved because I've seen that in you as well. Okay, my last question. What are you most excited to do next?
That's a big question. I mean, I'm excited, like talking about this, like I definitely can see all of the growth that I've been making. And I think right now is like a very like there's a lot happening right now. There's been a lot happening over the past year. I'll give myself that credit, but it just feels like there's a lot happening right now. And just like I'm looking forward to kind of like moving through that. And it's okay if there's more that's going to happen later, but kind of like being so proud of myself of me 3 months ago, me almost a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm looking forward to looking back at this and like seeing what I learned from it and being proud of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. I'm a crybaby, you know that. I'm like, I'm gonna cry, but
Okay. I think I'll cut us off there.